So when you were growing up, did you ever want to be an astronaut?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember Apollo 8, Christmas, I think 1968. I watched it on TV. It was all I ever wanted to be, was an astronaut. I couldn't think of a higher calling.
At what point in your life did that change?
When I had to get glasses. I had always planned on becoming a pilot, and I wanted to go into the Navy. And when I realized that you had to have pretty good vision, I was already wearing glasses. I've been wearing glasses for probably about 4 years. And it broke my heart. You know, it's what I really wanted to do.
There's actually a scene in a movie, Little Miss Sunshine, where this kid really wants to be a pilot, and he's sitting there talking with his uncle, and there's some sort of miscommunication basically, because the kid is it makes himself mute. He doesn't talk. He chooses not to talk, and some sort of miscommunication about color, basically, and the kid can't tell the difference between colors, and his uncle has to essentially break it to him that you can't be a pilot if you're colorblind. It's a great scene, but that's like almost like verbatim. It makes me think about that. Yeah. Well, I thought it was going to be like when you saw Alien and you're like, yeah, okay, fuck that shit, never going into space.
No, I would probably, if I had the chance, I'd go now. No doubt about it.
God bless you. I'm going to stay the fuck out of space. Cheers.
Here's the swimming with bow-legged women.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Welcome back to the Jony Horror Podcast. I am your host, Jony Horror, and with me tonight we have a very super duper special guest. Some might say he's the oldest of men. He's certainly the oldest man I know, but he is my old man, Michael Maresca. Happy to have you, sir.
I'm happy to be here. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you. This is something that you posed to me, actually, which was if you could come on the podcast. And there was or what you said was, can we do a podcast together? And I immediately, because of what you do for a living, I was like, are we going to be talking about diving? Like, does he want me to do a podcast with him? And then I was like, no, he probably wants to come on my podcast. And the second I thought about that, I was like, what will we talk about? And 2 seconds later, I knew exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. And I messaged you and was like, what do you want to talk about? And you got back to me instantly. And it was the exact same thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which is 1979's sci-fi horror classic directed by Ridley Scott, Alien.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into the nitty gritty of it all, why is Alien the movie that you wanted to discuss tonight?
Well, because we have a history with that movie. You came to live with me when you were about 13 years old, led a sheltered life.
Yes.
So I'm sure everybody that listens to your podcast knows about that.
Yeah.
And it was time to start taking off the reins and letting you do the things that you wanted to do, and you were interested in movies, especially horror movies. And I thought, let's watch a movie that or you can watch a movie that I love. And I don't know if it was the first scary movie you ever watched, but I know it was one of the first movies you watched at my house out in the middle of nowhere in probably the scariest place we've ever lived. And yeah, that's why.
Yeah, and I think that is probably exactly why I thought of it too. And we'll talk more about that experience and that whole thing in a minute. I do think that it is, oddly enough, because of that watch and everything that happened afterwards, that it is this movie that you and I bonded over. And it's a movie that we certainly talk about and bring up from time to time, but not enough for both of us to just be like shooting from the hip. That's obviously the movie that we're talking about without having discussed it, at all. So I did get quite a kick out of that, and it just kind of reassured what I already knew, that this was kind of like certainly a seminal moment for me in my youth and my upbringing, because you're absolutely right. This is probably, I always say that 2003's Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake is like my first true blue horror movie that I ever watched, and there's a great story behind that too for another time, but this is probably like the first legitimately like scary movie I ever saw, which is probably about 6 months before I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So before we talk about us watching that movie together, I just kind of, as I typically do with most first-time guests, I just want to know a little bit about your history with horror. Now, obviously, you're not like a die-hard horror fan like a lot of the people that I do have on. This is a kind of a special circumstance, but what is your history with scary movies? Do you remember the first scary movie you saw? First
scary movie I ever saw, scary for me, was The Day the Earth Stood Still. And back then, this is back in the 60s, and I remember my family traveled a lot. My father was always on the road, and we lived in hotels quite a bit. And I remember there was The Day the Earth Stood Still, and then the first movie was it's an Elvis Presley movie, Jailhouse Rock. And so it was those two movies, and I remember seeing the Elvis movie and trying to stay up for that The Day the Earth Stood Still. And I remember watching it, and I was always scared as a kid. I was scared of flat tires. I was scared of everything, and I was really excited to see that movie. First of all, my dad was around, which didn't happen very often, so I thought, well, he'll protect me. And we were in a hotel, which is always exciting for me. And I remember staying up, and I don't really remember that much about the movie. I'm sure I didn't watch all that much of it. I would imagine I hid my head in the pillow or something after a while, but that's the first scary movie I ever saw. And you're right. I mean, I'm not really, definitely not a horror slasher kind of guy. I like the science fiction horror movies, and that's it. I love science fiction.
Yeah, that's why we're gonna, when we wrap up this podcast tonight, I'm gonna show him the Thing, which he's never ever seen, which kind of boggled my mind because it's so up your alley. But it's very interesting to me. I was thinking about this when I came up with the question that I posed to you at the start of this ep, is that you were born 1960, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you essentially were a young boy all through pretty much the good chunk of the space race, you know, and then, like, I'm sure a good chunk of that is foggy because it was beginning in your youth, but I have to imagine that played a huge part in, you know, just your growth as an individual, because particularly with the films that were coming out at that time, it was all science fiction based because we were in uncharted territory, essentially. So naturally, as with any good time period in horror, we're taking things that are real fears and anxieties and we're exaggerating them, blowing them up. So yeah, you have the day the earth stood still, you have the forbidden planet, you have invaders from Mars, the thing from another world. You have all of these things that we're, you know, becoming conscious of as a society. As you know, in the 1950s, it was all nuclear stuff and the radiation and what that could do to, you know, like something like the horror film Them, which is like, you know, about giant ants that you know, are exposed to radiation, all that stuff. So that, were you at all conscious of all the, just maybe not even just horror stuff, but just like space men in general, like at the time? Is that something that you can remember being aware of?
So I want to say that I knew a lot about it. You know, I grew up really, I mean, I think before I wanted to be an astronaut, I wanted to be a pilot. Because the first time I took an airplane I was 6 years old, traveling to Asia, and I just thought it was the most glamorous thing to do, you know, to be a pilot. And I'm so glad I didn't. It seems like a boring job to me now. But you know, I wanted to be a pilot. And then when I saw astronauts, I was like, well, fuck that. You know, I want to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I saw a lot of that. And growing up, you know, my mom, she told me about War of the Worlds, you know, the radio show with Orson Welles, and I just remember thinking that must have been horrifying to really think that was happening, you know, the way they portrayed it. And she told me, you know, I don't know if she was listening to the radio at the time or whether she had heard about it later on or something, but she just told me what a frightening thing it was to even think about that was possible.
Yeah, I think, you know, particularly in this day of social media and, you know, fake news, all that bullshit, I think that might still be one of the greatest, you know, things that was pulled over against, you know, a collective group of people, is that this alien invasion was happening. I obviously the way that news traveled was very much different back then. Stroke of genius. One of the Orson Welles, who's just, his, you know, accolades are endless. You know, to me, that's the thing I think about, you know, that, and, you know, Citizen Kane, but, you know, that to me, I'm just like, that must have been so much fun for him to scare the shit out of all of mankind.
Yeah.
So with all that said, you'll pardon me here 1 second. I have this terrible OCD thing where I'm afraid the camera isn't recording. You know, I just have to,
if
check it once.
I'm gonna be pissed.
I've had it where we've recorded whole sessions and then the sound didn't work or something like that, and you 2 hours of podcasting down the drain. Do you remember the first time you saw Alien?
Yeah, I do. So, I mean, there was big hype about it, and I wasn't really the guy that would go see a movie on the first night or anything like that, but I had a friend who was. His name was Tim, and his life was movies. He'd go see a movie every chance he got. I remember he told me about Apocalypse Now, and by the time he was done talking, I knew about the whole movie.
Mm-hmm.
So there was nothing, the tiger coming out of the jungle and all that. Nothing shocked me, because it's like he told me everything, and I don't like that. I want to be surprised.
Yeah.
I want my Christmas on Christmas morning. I don't want to know earlier.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he told me, oh, you gotta go see Alien. It's amazing, and right up my alley. Something that I definitely wanted to see. So I saw it at the movie, not at the movie theater. I saw it at the drive-in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we all saw our movies
Yeah.
back then. If you were a teenager, if the movie was shit, then you just hung out with everybody else in the arcade or whatever, and so it was a place that we would go.
Yeah, I gotta interject here. It's on my bucket list. I have not had the pleasure. It is something that I want to do so bad. I really wanted to do it during COVID, but there was nowhere like that was within like reason that I could lock down to go see it. But man, I want to see a couple of flicks. I would love to do a double feature at the drive-in. But yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
It's cool, and as you say that, Akiko had never been to a drive-in, and I don't know, about 8 years ago we went to one in Pomona. I think it was Pomona, somewhere around there.
Always Pomona.
We saw Minions, so kind of not really the best movie to see.
You know what? It's still. I'm sure you guys had a blast.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. But so anyway, I saw it at the drive-in. I don't recall if there's no way I went alone. I would have had somebody with me, a friend or a girlfriend or something. But I don't remember who was with me. So I knew about the chest burst scene, and that was pretty much all I knew. So being the kind of person that wasn't really into horror, it was kind of nice to know that was coming up for me. Because it's still like, when you see it, you're shocked, right?
Yes.
It's like, it doesn't matter if you expect it or not. When that thing comes out, it's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And just watching it again, it was amazing to see the acting of all those people. And, I know there's talk about, they didn't know it, but they had to know
something.
Enough.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe they didn't know they were going to be squirted with all the blood or whatever, but still, just watching the way they went through that, it's so amazing to watch. I just love that scene.
So when you were done, do you recollect at all what it was like when you kind of finished that movie? Were you in a state of like, I want more of that, or were you just like, all right, cool, yeah, fuck that shit, like that's enough for now, like I don't need any more scary stuff? Do you remember the vibe coming out?
When I watch a movie that really is like earth shaking for me, I sit and think about that for days on end. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably what happened to me. I mean, that, for me, The Matrix was a movie that went over in my head for weeks and weeks, and I saw it over and over again. And I don't recall that I went and saw Alien again right away, but it's one of those things that's always something that I would be mulling over, throughout the time. But yeah, I think... I don't think I thought, nah, I don't want to see it again, or I've had enough. I definitely could have seen it again, because, to me, this is a movie that you can watch over and over again. And the thing that, I don't want to spoil it, but for me, it was so dark in the beginning, it's really hard to see. So,
especially if you saw the drive-in,
yeah,
fucking like 70s or early 80s, whenever you saw it, I'm sure it's so fucking hard to see what's going on.
I mean, that was good at that point, because, I saw, we watched it last night.
Yeah,
obviously.
we watched it last night. We did.
And, I saw when the alien comes out, and this is what it does. It's like,
yeah.
And I thought, if I'd have seen that back then, I'd be like, well, it's not that scary. So that part of it was really good, because you wanted to see more of the alien. You wanted to see, and you really couldn't.
Yeah.
You could watch it again, but it was hard to see.
Yeah.
So,
my first watch obviously was with you. I I was 13 years old. I'm same way. I was a very, very scared young man, scared of everything. Yes, like as you mentioned before, I've stated on this podcast that I had a very sheltered upbringing, and every fucking thing scared me. I'm sure I've said it on this podcast, and much to my chagrin, that like I was so afraid of the story of A Christmas Carol and Jacob Marley that the Disney version where Goofy, the most silly character in the history of all cartoons, scared the piss out of me because he was Jacob Marley. That is the level of, terror that would be brought up in my mind on a regular basis. So I made a habit of going to, the older I got, I feel like you even made a joke one time that you thought that maybe I was this is back when there were movie stores, this is like video rental places. And we would go and we would pick out movies. And during the time when I lived with you, it was a little bit different. You would tell me stuff like, oh yeah, I thought you were, off in the porno section checking out, the back of those covers. And as much as I'm sure I would have liked it, but I didn't have the stones to do that, I would sneak off into the horror section. I remember specifically after you and Mom had split, Mom and I had gone to the video store, and I had kind of snuck off. I don't even know, like in my mind, I don't even know how I could sneak this video. You could see.
Yeah, it's not bigger than this.
Yeah, you could see anywhere. I feel like the one that I'm talking about too. And I would just sneak off to the horror section and look at the back of boxes. I remember vividly staring at the box for A Nightmare on Elm Street and just being legitimately terrified of Freddy Krueger. And then I would do the same thing when she and I would like go to, again, this is after you guys had split, and I'd just go with her to the store. And one night we were like at Walmart, and I went and just like looked at the movies. That time I was looking at Maxim magazine, and Christina Aguilera was she was just so hot back then, circa 2002. But I had also snuck off to the horror section and remember looking at the back of all those boxes and being terrified just from looking at the pictures. Anyways, this is a long-winded way of saying I remember I had just moved in with you, and you had the quadrilogy box set of Alien sitting in your truck, and you had gone in, I don't know if it was into work or into somewhere. I stayed in the car, whatever it was, and I just peered over that box set front to back for probably like 30 minutes straight, just looking at all the pictures, looking at all the detail, because it was this very, very beautiful, like, holographic thing. It ended up being part of my movie collection years later, before we upgraded to the Blu-ray release that we watched last night. But it was gorgeous, and I was so, as your mind does, like, you picture what all of these images mean and what they are. So I don't know, I can't remember if it was you or me. I'm sure it was me that posed, "Can we watch this?" And we sat and we watched it in our house in the Mojave Desert, which our nearest neighbor was like a half a mile, quarter of a mile away, like a good distance away. And then there was nobody else.
And there was an open mine shaft.
There was an open mine shaft, and there was train tracks that were probably like half a mile, 3/4 of a mile away. And I always
across the street.
That was really close, and that was always the thing. Anytime those trains would go by, I'd always imagine like some vagabond like hopping off because he saw a house and was gonna come rob us. But that was it. Like we had that one neighbor and nobody else was around, and I had been living with you maybe like a month tops, like not a long time. So getting used to a very new, very scary environment, and this is the first movie of this caliber that I had ever watched. And I remember sitting, watching, really having absolutely no expectation of what this film was going to be about. And I watched it. You were on one couch, I was on another, and then the film ended. And you're like, "Are you good?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." And I went and laid in my bed for about less than 5 minutes, and I came in with my pillow and my blanket. And this is me as a 13-year-old kid being like, "Dad, can I sleep on your floor because I'm scared?" And I think I proceeded to sleep on your floor for the next week straight.
I think it was a few nights.
Yeah.
And I remember the one caveat I said: if we're gonna watch this movie, you sleep in your own room.
Yeah.
And
yeah. The rest of the time that we lived at that house, I always thought of Alien. There was times when, you'd be away at work, during the summertime, and I'd be at the house by myself in the middle of broad daylight. And I remember one time I just had to get out of the house because I was so spooked, and I just went for a walk in the fucking desert. I walked up that hill where the mine shaft was, and this is after we had watched Alien 3, because we eventually progressed through all of them. And in that one, the alien runs on all fours, and I had this vivid picture in my mind of me being up on the hill and just seeing the alien run out of our house coming up to the hill, because that's the way my imagination worked. Long story short, this movie fucked me up. So we're gonna talk about Alien. In the film, a group of dumbasses essentially wake up from their hypersleep and go on a detour to a planet to try and do some sort of bullshit rescue mission. Anyways, dumbass horror movie people doing dumbass horror movie people things. One of them gets infected and brings it back on board to, fucking give birth to a new alien species that slowly but surely begins to destroy all of the crew. I usually say blah, blah, blah. We've seen it all before, but I really don't think we have seen anything like this before. The film was directed by Ridley Scott. He had directed one feature film before this that was very well received. He did this, and it changes the whole course of his career. Going into the film, Tom Skerritt was the headliner, the big name, and as we all know, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched Alien, what are you doing? Don't listen to this podcast. Go watch the movie and then come back and watch this podcast. Tom Skerritt dies 3/4 of the way through the movie, and our main hero ends up being Ripley, aka Sigourney Weaver. This film was, a long process of a lot of different heads coming together. The script started with Dan O'Bannon, was originally titled Star Beast, and went through various progressions to chisel out to what we get. A big game changer is H.R. Geiger. His artwork ends up being what kind of the whole production design of the film is based upon, specifically, obviously, the xenomorph itself. Ridley Scott is brought on. Ridley Scott is a force to be reckoned with as a director in this film in particular, and would go on to do things like, obviously, Blade Runner, which I feel like is would make for a great double feature with this film. and obviously Gladiator and so on and so forth. Ridley Scott's accolades are also endless. This is, it's probably in the top 50, horror films of all time, if not the top 50, top 100 films of all time. I think when it first came out, it might have had a little bit of mixed to positive reviews, but it has slowly but surely become one of the all-time greats and has spawned many sequels. One in particular, some consider to be superior even to the original. But that's all stuff that you can read about, watch documentaries, there's books, there's all sorts of stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about some behind the scenes and whatnot as we go on. But for this particular conversation, I just want it to be a conversation. We're going to talk about the things we liked, the things we didn't like, and kind of more our personal feelings about this film, as opposed to doing an in-depth history about Alien, because there's so much out there for all of you listeners to check out. So if you feel the need, YouTube it. I'm sure there's go to Barnes and Noble or Audible or whatever, listen to books and all that shit. But for the time being, we're going to talk about the film and the things that we enjoyed and we didn't enjoy, and the rewatch value it has, and essentially its legacy and our own personal feelings about the film. So without any further fucking ado, let's talk about the good stuff.
All right.
There's an endless amount of good things in this film as far as I'm concerned, but let's talk about some standout stuff. Hit me with a couple of things, or we can tit for tat. What do you like about this film?
I think first of all, the thing that hits me, and it starts right off in the beginning, they make you wait. Like you watch the opening credits and it's like, this thing takes forever to go around, from one side of the planet to the other, and for the alien to come up on the screen and all that. And the whole movie is like that. They make you work for it. You gotta sit there and it's got you captured, and you're like, when's it coming? Obviously, I'm sure you would say it's reminiscent of Jaws in that way, that you don't see the alien for quite a while in the movie.
I think at some point Dan O'Banion might have floated the fact that this was Jaws in space. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Jaws comes out 4 years prior to this. That is, when I think about this picture, I think about the fact that it is so fucking patient in all the right ways. Like, the dread and the suspense that it builds is almost unprecedented. Like, I can't think of another movie that builds tension in quite the same way that Alien does. And to me, like, the only other parallel is The Exorcist, but The Exorcist is different in the sense that The Exorcist is just dread and tension and fear the entire time. This one very much builds to what is a satisfying conclusion. And it's very calculated. I feel like it knows what it's doing. It gives you stuff. What you said, you have to work for it. And upon this rewatch, that was one of the things that I thought about during the title sequence. I was just like, man, they take their time, and it's so smart, because you get to a point where you're like, okay, come on.
They milk it.
And then you get to a point where you're like, all right, it's still going. And the score and almost the lack thereof, whatever drone sound effect, that ambient space sound effect is one of the scariest things I've ever heard, ever. And I love that. There is no way in hell that a picture like this gets made today because whether or not audiences would actually go for it, studio heads don't think they do. So there's no way a movie like this gets made today.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see. That was kind of a big one of mine too. The thing that I said to you when we were watching it last night, and I got two notes here, and they're kind of one and the same, but whenever I think of Alien, I think of a very small movie. Mm-hmm. Like, I think of a very contained, isolated, claustrophobic film, which it is. Mm-hmm. Because then you think of its sequels and everything's bigger and more open. But, like, there's a lot of big stuff happening in this movie, and the set design is, like, amazing.
Yeah, it is.
To me, because you know that those are all practical sets.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in the time period, think of, like, Star Wars and stuff like that, they would use a lot of, like, matte paintings, backdrops that were, very, very detailed to kind of give depth to these things. And I couldn't spot really too many of those, maybe like on the planet or something like that.
Yeah, on the alien ship.
But like on the actual like vessel Nostromo, like it all very much looked like practical sets to me, which is insane because you see like when is it Brett what's his name?
Stanton.
Yeah. His character, thank God bless you for just, Brett. When he's searching for Jones, like, and he goes through all these different corridors and whatnot, he's walking there and they're huge and you're like, oh my God, they built these sets. For a movie that every time I think of it, I'm like, just very small, contained, like, very claustrophobic picture. It has these very grandiose set pieces. The space jockey, is really second to none because they walk onto that and that thing is massive. And it was one of those things when I was watching last night, I was like, why do I think this movie's so small? It really is big,
But I have to, I have a thought on that. It's like, because the Nostromo is huge too. I mean, if you look at it, it's like this massive thing, and like you said, the worker guys, they're walking around down in the bowels, and it seems like it's huge. But then, what makes it seem so small is they're stuck.
Yes,
they're stuck, and it's claustrophobia that makes it feel like it's so small, regardless of how big it is, because there's two things that are going to kill you. You either get killed by the alien or you get off that thing and you get killed by space.
Yeah.
One or the other is going to kill you. And I mean, that's got to be terrifying,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was thinking about that last night of that to me is a true horror, because, I'm a diver.
Yes.
And I became a diver because I suffer from claustrophobia and I have panic attacks, and I wanted to face up to them. So that's why I did what I did. Although I've always wanted to see the undersea world, but that's only part of it. The other part was I wanted to not be afraid of those things anymore.
Yeah.
And I think I have a healthy respect and a healthy fear for those things, but I'm not afraid like I was before.
Yeah.
And but I can't imagine being stuck on a ship with something that you can't even, if you fight it, you've got to figure out a way to kill it without making it bleed, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise you're dead.
Yeah.
So
that was one of the things that when I was thinking about it this watch, like I really hadn't consider that because I think of Aliens and I'm like, dude, they're just blowing those motherfuckers away left and right. But it's so different in Aliens because they're not in a spot where, you know, they could have a hull breach and destroy the whole ship. Like, I was really, like, it really kind of hit me this time. I'm like, dude, they can't fucking kill it. They absolutely have to blow it out into space. Like, it really registered with me that time and I was like, oh, yeah, they can't do anything to it because it will really kill them. And I was like, damn, that's just, like, that makes that acid blood thing, like, even... Because if you think about it, it really does not play... It is not that much of a, an ace in the pocket, like, moving forward. Like, it really isn't. If you think about the sequels. In this one, it absolutely is. Because if they blow it up or something like that, they could essentially destroy themselves.
Yeah.
I really just hit me this time. I was like, dude, that's fucking genius. What else you got for me? Hit me with another thing that stood out to you.
So the thing that again, I probably I would have never thought of this back in the 70s and 80s, but it seems really relevant now, and it's such a novel concept. It's the men who are getting fucked in this movie, you know, and the woman is the hero, really, you know. But you know, the monster. I mean, it's like when the small set of teeth comes out, it looks like it's like a dildo, right?
Yeah.
And it goes right into the guy's face, and the face hugger, you know, and Kane, right?
Yeah.
He gets impregnated.
Yeah.
And it's just it's just a thing that goes throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
That the men are the ones that are getting fucked.
Yeah.
So
I remember, again, like I said, I would, read and look at that box set from front to back, and that included, like, back when, God, what a beautiful time it was when the DVD box sets were so in depth that they would give you, like, the chapters breaking down. You have, like, somewhere between 15 to 25, chapters that, and you still have it on the Blu-ray where you can kind of click and it'll take you to the next one, but it had the chapters listed and they all had names. And I remember specifically one just saying, in quotations, Kane's son. And, like, it's a very weird thing because, like, I'm your son and that's fine. But in the context of the film, Kane's son is, like, Kane's the mom. Kane gave birth to this. And it's a very weird sort of, juxtaposition to everything that we are familiar with and understanding as human beings in the way that nature, plays out. I think I do think the same thing. I've always thought, in just kind of a little, one step forward, two steps back sort of thing to what you're saying, is there is that moment where Lambert dies and she's just, kind of sitting there essentially waiting for it to happen, which, everyone's always like, fucking move, why don't you fucking move? And we all say that, but also at the same time, like, if you were in that position, you don't know, right? But I always thought the tail essentially kind of like coming up behind her is very, very phallic. And there's like a very sexual, because the way it like curves and it's coming from like behind, it is it's very predatorial and has a rapey vibe.
Yeah, because it loops around her, like
her backside. Yeah.
And then when she's dead, you see her, and you just see her naked foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so weird because we were watching this movie last night, and I was just hopping through Instagram today, and I clicked on this one thing that was just in my search feed, and it was all these different interpretations of Lambert's death. It just happened to kind of be on there. I scrolled through them. They're all variations of the same thing, and then there's one that's just like her like stuck on a pike, and she's like, it's just her upper torso and her guts are hanging out. And like, to me, I'm like, that's actually like, you don't see anything, but that's more what I think is what actually happened to her.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. And it is, I think at the time, just was probably unheard of. And I mean, I know we're just saying stuff that people have already said about this film before, but the fact that you do, it's not, because we have the year prior, 1978, you know, you have Laurie Strode in Halloween. A couple years before that, in 1974, Black Christmas. Jess is the final girl, even though it's heavily implied that she dies. So this idea of like a woman surviving is not necessarily new by 1979, being the last survivor. I just think in the context of the film, the way that they kind of position all these characters, like Sigourney Weaver's there. She's just kind of there throughout the whole film. If anything, and I had this kind of in a random thoughts section, but like nobody really likes her. If anything, she's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
To the rest of the crew, because she's just like, no, don't do that. This is stupid. She is us as the audience being like, what the fuck are you? No, don't do that. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why it plays so well, is because she is an avatar for the audience the entire time. Just being like, no, don't do that. You're being stupid. Don't do that. And because she's so unassuming, because we don't, with Halloween, we know who our heroine is. You know, we know it's Laurie Strode. Same thing with Black Christmas. We start out, you know, we follow Jess, like, and we're following her. With Alien, it's an ensemble piece, you know. No character is necessarily higher than the other, with the exception again of Tom Skerritt being the top billed actor because he was the most famous person at the time. So you assume he's gonna be our guy, which up to a point he is.
But even John Hurt, you know.
Yeah, because he was big name too at the time. Yeah. So,
and I mean, I can't think of what else he was in, but Yaphet Kotto. I mean, he
was a big deal too. Yeah. I remember them talking about that, like in the making of documentary, that just the fact that he was even there was a big deal. The fact that they got him on, and I was like, I don't know who this guy is, but he must be the shit, because everyone seems to really kind of revere him. So.
Just to go a little bit along those lines, it's almost like Lambert. It's almost like she's this whiny person, and almost like I would think she's the one that's going to surprise everybody. Yeah, you know, but she doesn't. And then also something I'd never picked up on before is when they go down to the planet, it's John Hurt and her. They say, we're the ones that have to go. Yeah. And I kind of got the impression that they might have had some military training or something, and that's why they're supposed to go. And so I was thinking, you look at those two and you think, well, maybe they're the heroes. Who knows?
Yeah, I got my take on it, you know, because Dallas, Tom Skerritt, he, you know, when they're saying they're going to go down, John Hurt says, you know, as Kane, he says, yeah, I'll be among the first to go. And to me, he's just a hothead. To me, I get that, like, he's just like, he's the dude that's like gonna go run across a wooden bridge or, you know, dive off a mountain. Like I just get that vibe from him that he's just like fearless to a fault because you see it. You see him like when they're in the ship, he's going and exploring shit that he just should not fuck with. And it bites him in the ass. Whereas the Veronica Cartwright character, Dallas tells her, hey, you're coming too. And she's like, yeah, kind of begrudgingly. So I get that almost like same thing where she's someone who's capable to whatever her experience has been. Because she's, when they say she's coming along, she's not like, no, I don't want to go. She's just like, yeah, whatever, okay. So I think she is capable to whatever experience she's ever had. The problem is that what they're experiencing is nothing that she's, you know...
Nobody's prepared for.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Like I said, there's an endless amount of things that I could talk about in this film that are good, and later we'll kind of get to like our favorite scenes and whatnot. One thing that I really like about this movie doesn't exactly have to do with the movie itself, but it has to do with the promotional stuff. I remember watching the bonus. I mean, I watched every single piece of bonus material I could on that thing because I was so infatuated with the whole experience. The teaser trailer for it just fucking it scared me all over again. I watched the teaser trailer in broad daylight. I can't remember if you were home or not, but it scared the piss out of me, even though I'd already seen the movie. Yeah. I was like, that's just like a gorgeous piece of marketing. I ended up taking the sound, the sound design. I don't know if you can even call it music, and you know, using it years later in my own teaser trailer for a little scary movie that I put together back in the day. But and then they ended up using a very, very, very similar sort of style of sound design for the trailer for Prometheus back in 2012. So all I'm saying is that it is just a genius piece of marketing, and if I can remember, I will put a link in the description so you can go check that trailer out, because I think it's just really cool. It manages to be scary without giving anything away. I think it's almost like entirely still shots for the most part. But any other good stuff that you want to hit me with?
For me, you know, I'm obviously big Star Wars fan.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to tie that in a little bit. Yeah. I couldn't figure out how, but...
Well, for me, you know, when they started showing the Nostromo, and it's like, wow, that's just as good, if not better, than the battle cruisers in Star Wars. Yeah. You know, the model making and the alien ship. I mean, just fantastic. I just thought, like you said, the sets, the inside of the Nostromo, I thought was just so cool. You know, even though now I think like the computer room doesn't really hold up the way it would have back in 1979.
Yeah.
You know, still, I think, you know, just looking at it last night, I thought, what beautiful sets, and the models were fantastic, and I mean, all of that, the planet, just fantastic.
Yeah, I think there's the reason that, like, I kind of give a pass to kind of like, you know, some of the computer stuff, and like, you know, they walk into the I don't know if it's the captain's quarters or what, but wherever Mother is, and it's just like a bunch of flashing lights that, you know, gosh, what a fun time it was to imagine the future of, you know, mankind back in the early, you know, 80s, late 70s and whatnot. But kind of the thing that and I feel like we can probably round out the good stuff with this, is that it all feels so grounded because the dialogue is believable, the performances are believable, the way that again, this kind of goes back to production design, but the costumes and just the environment, it feels so lived in.
Yeah.
It's like it all feels very, very natural in a way that, I don't know, maybe movies today wouldn't be, where like people, the conversations that they're having, just like every time that they're sitting at the dining table, you know, and you're picking up on half of conversations as the camera's rotating around the room. You got Brett and Parker talking about bonuses, and you got, you know, Ash and Kane just talking bullshitting, and Dallas chiming in, and, you know, all these conversations, it just feels so lived in a way that, gosh, just so few movies today do. Everything in movies today, and God, I sound like such an old timer, but it just, like, everything just feels like so polished and so like, we know there's a camera on us, you know, as opposed to these people that are just doing a job, coming back from whatever mining trip that they were on, just being people, and then they're thrown into this extraordinary situation, and never once does it feel like any of these people are acting, you know, which is fucking incredible.
Yeah.
Again, when you're dealing with something like 7 or 8 performers, and, you know, these wide shots and everything just feels so natural and believable that when you get to the extraordinary stuff, you buy it because you've already bought into these characters and the world that they live in. So, yeah, I agree. Just the legwork that is essentially done to build up to this grander story, is just so genius. And again, I think, you know, there's a lot of genius minds behind all of this. Dan O'Banion, you have H.R. Geiger, all of that. I just think so much of it does end up falling on Ridley Scott, because again, you see it a few years later when he does Blade Runner. Like, talk about feeling lived in. That is a dirty, gross world that you're just like, yeah, this is a place somewhere in another universe. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
So
I think, you know, that so many times when you talk about a space movie, you've got these, you know, astronauts in uniforms, and they're like gods, right?
Yeah.
You know, they have all this confidence, or they portray all this confidence, and these guys are space truckers in Hawaiian shirts, you know, and it makes them more relatable, you know, because you can say, oh, you know, I could see myself in that, because, you know, basically what they're doing is they're driving a truck home.
Yeah. I was thinking, and this is something that I thought about, and I talked about this in my review recently for The Lost World Jurassic Park, with the Jeff Goldblum character, Ian Malcolm, is this guy who's this begrudging hero, where he doesn't want to be in this position at all, and he only ever decides to stand up and kind of be a man when he has to be, when nobody else is doing it. If somebody else is around to, you know, handle the reins, like, he's like, all right, cool, I'll take a step back. And like, I relate to that so much. And I relate to, I was watching it and I was like, fuck, man, I would totally be Dallas in this. Like, I would totally be making all these wrong decisions just because, like, I would be so unequipped. I'm the captain of this ship, but and people are looking at me for answers, but I would constantly be making the wrong decisions, and then be like, all right, cool, I guess, yeah, like, I have to be the one to go into the air shaft. And then the minute I get in there, be like, fuck,
Mistake.
get me out of here. And that, like, his performance, I was just watching it. I was like, that's probably like the most realistic performance in this whole, film, because I'm like, he's the leader. He is, and he wears it well, but he's not meant for this. He's just a captain on a fucking mining vessel. He's not meant to be dealing with these life or death situations. So yeah, he's constantly messing up. He's trying to do the right thing, but it's just, he just keeps on fucking up left and right. And I just related to that so much. I was like, God, that's so human. And so much of the time we see ourselves as, wanting to be, Neo or Luke Skywalker. And in reality, we're all probably like Dallas.
Remember when we lived in Mojave and that guy came?
Yeah,
to the other house?
That's what I very much thought about when we were talking about the derelict jumping off of the fucking, train. I thought about that guy that came to the other house and he had to fucking, bust out the shotgun and I was like hiding in the bathroom.
But when you talked about Dallas, that's what I felt like. It's one thing to get the shotgun. It's another thing when you go outside and you can't see the guy, but he's there, and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And all I did was I shot in the air.
Yeah.
And I yelled at him, and then, he kind of backed off. But
yeah,
it's like, I know exactly how Dallas must have felt, because when I went out there, I was like, oh, shit, this was a fucking bad idea.
I fucked up. Yeah.
And the other thing I was thinking about while I was out there is like, I don't want to have to kill somebody.
Yeah.
I don't want to have that on my mind for the rest of my life. So.
Yeah, that's the difference between, your circumstance and the circumstance in the film is that you're dealing with actually killing a human being, and that's a whole other level of, guilt and, self-doubt and all that. So, yeah, that's, that might be for another podcast entirely. But
one more thing before we
please hit me.
Milk.
Milk.
Ash and drinking milk and milk.
Dude, so this is the first time that I don't think I've ever noticed it before, when he is in the laboratory and he just gets done talking to Ripley, she walks away and he's drinking, and I was like, what the fuck is he? I'm like, son of a bitch, he's drinking milk!
Yeah. And I love that.
Yeah, I do too. I don't know, and that got me wondering. I'm like, all right, so do they have to ingest milk? Is it part of their, thing? Does that work? Or is it already, part of our blood where it just recycles? What is it? It just got me thinking about it. And I was like, that's just a fun detail either way.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched it, and when he gets the shit kicked out of him, he starts, he's got a little bit of little bit of milk here, and it's like, what the hell is that? And then they take his head off, and there's milk everywhere. I just thought that was so cool.
I remember vividly just not being prepared for that, and when Parker knocks off his head, I think my heart skipped a beat, because I was so unprepared for what that revelation was gonna be.
Yeah.
And and this is a kid in 2003 or some shit. I can't even imagine what it was like for people back in 1979. They probably were fucking
never seen anything like that.
No one was prepared for that shit. I am, we're gonna take an unscheduled break here. We're gonna come back. We're gonna keep on talking about Alien. We're gonna talk about some of the things maybe we didn't like, and a couple other things moving forward, but we will be right back. This is the Jony Horror Podcast. I'm your host, Jony Horror, and with me, Michael Maresca, my dad, and we'll be right back with you, motherfuckers.